that we have a copy of this to send to those who couldn't make it this evening. So thank you for being here in person. It makes a nice little group of us, which is great. So we're talking tonight about finding balance for stress. And I think finding balance is important because we can't always eliminate stress from our world. So we're going to talk about what is burnout. We're going to talk about stress and burnout, the HPA axis, which is a term you may have come across, or if not, then you will tonight. Health impacts of stress and the long-term impacts on our health. I'm going to talk about understanding your own stress. And by that, I mean looking at your biology with the sort of functional medicine testing that we can do. We're going to talk about your mindset for stress and talk some steps to reverse burnout, because that's what's important, isn't it? We might know it's happening, but how can we reverse those that burnout and the effects on our health? So for those who I'm yet to meet, my name is Julia. I'm one of the practitioners at Naturopathic medicine. Someone's got a bit of noise in the background. If you've got going on, or other people in the room, cats, dogs, if you don't mind muting yourself just to avoid distraction. Thank you for that. That's great. So let's get started. So what does stress look like in Australia today? I'm just going to mute another one. There we go. I think that was the culprit. There we go. So stress in Australia today. These are statistics from a workplace study was done last year. So this one has told us that 44% of Australian employees have high levels of stress in their job. So we're finding stress in the workplace. We're also aware that chronic unresolved stress can expose a person to elevated stress hormones. And we're going to talk a lot about what those hormones do to us and the HPA axis. So that's the combination of our hypothalamic, pituitary and adrenal system. 2 in 3 Australians report that stress impacts their mental health. That is huge. We have a growing mental health problem in this country, and stress is definitely impacting that. Nearly 3 in 4 Australians report that stress impacts their physical health as well. And we'll look at the various ways that stress can impact our physical health, because it's not always the obvious ones. So let's start with looking at what a stressful situation looks like. If you haven't already seen this video, it's on YouTube. I really encourage you to search for it. If you look up the title of it is something like a hiker mountain lion in Utah. So this is a young chap who's hiking in the mountains, and he comes across a mountain lion, which starts to follow him down the trail. So obviously a really stressful situation. And he very cleverly starts to walk away from it. You can hear his heart rate increasing. You can hear him breathing more heavily. You can imagine that if this was you, you would have your pupils dilating. You would start to feel quite different in your body. And that certainly happens for him. So all of those things occur. As that occurs, so what's happening in his body is the release of cortisol. So the stress hormone makes us join this sort of fight or flight situation, and our sympathetic nervous system is governing that response. So his digestion and reproductive function would be reducing as his body prepares to fly. So he's preparing to deal with this challenge in life. And as his body prepares to respond to the threat, it reduces all the non-essential functions. So this is where some of those impacts can come in our long-term health, long-term chronic stress. So this is an acute thing that happens, and we need it to happen. It's important. It keeps us alive, essentially, in situations like this. But the sort of stress that we're under on a day-to-day basis isn't usually mountain lions. They're quite unusual. The usual stuff sits in one of these categories. So this was another Australian study that was done. The source here is Employment Hero, and they looked at the different types of stress and the reasons why people are feeling stressed in their life. And they reported that there were physical issues with their health and stress, mental stresses, financial pressures, occupational stress. So I spoke to someone today, a new patient, who was telling me that they felt they'd been in a toxic workplace. And that's a phrase that I hear quite commonly, that the workplace is causing stress. Relational stress, of course, within our family, within our relationships. Spiritual stress, so lack of spiritual connection, and of course recreational, so people feeling isolated or not feeling a part of their social circle, and perhaps moving away from their social circle as a response to stress. So there's lots of different areas that stress can come from. But one of the things about stress is, it's not always a negative thing. Yes, too much stress is negative, and we can see that in this slide. So this comes from a book by Robert M. Sapolsky. I'm sure I haven't pronounced that absolutely correctly, but he talks about the importance of having some stress in our life. So when we are understimulated, we can get bored. When there's not enough going on in our lives, we can get really quite apathetic. And that really presents itself as a type of stress. Then when we get to the other end of the spectrum, when we're chronically stressed and we've been overstimulated for too long, whether that's through workplace stress or stress at home or stress through our family relationships, wherever it's coming from, that long-term nature of it becomes more of an impact on our body. And if you look at the two axes there, the bottom axis is corticosteroid or cortisol release. And the cortisol release gets worse and gets increased the longer term the stress is, and the longer term nature, of the stress. So although they both represent stress on our system, the chronic type of stress is worse for us because it's overstimulating our system and can create the health impacts we're going to talk about soon. So it's interesting, isn't it, that being bored, having not enough stress, is still a factor. So there's this kind of sweet spot, and we call it eustress, where we're getting enough stimulation, where we're challenged by work, we're challenged by life, but we're not in that too hard bracket. We're not stressing about everything that comes along. And there are 12 known stages of burnout, and they sort of follow that graph, where stage 1, we're feeling quite in control. We feel that there's maybe starting to be a reason to prove ourselves, and this is definitely shown in the workplace, all the way through to where we start to feel mentally and physically collapsing. And this is what we think of as burnout. And it really is a continuum. It doesn't happen overnight, but we can stop these stages along the way and reverse the process. And maybe if you recognize yourself on this continuum, it's good to just mark that for yourself and where you feel you might be and how long you might have been traveling on this continuum. And perhaps for others around you, family members or friends that might be dealing with these sort of long-term challenges. So let's think about some of the signs of stress. So you can definitely have stress without reaching burnout. So stress signs are reactive. There's a sense of urgency to them. We might notice anxiety. That anxiety can lead to disturbances in our sleep. I think the key one for me, that third one down on the stress signs, is low energy but high yield. So think of this as being someone who's feeling flat, feeling like they don't have enough energy, but they're pushed to achieve, they're pushed to meet the deadlines, deal with the inbox, manage the project, whatever it might be. That high yield is something they can't change. And so that becomes more of a stress. That definitely can lead closer into burnout. On a physical level, at this point, we might notice some of the gut symptoms, particularly IBS type symptoms, and definitely appetite changes can happen as well. So some of you might recognize a few of those stress signs in yourself or in others around you. So looking at burnout is a little bit different. Burnout is that longer term chronic effect of stress. It's where we start to check out, where we start to move away from our social networks, where we start to feel overwhelmed. and that can lead to exhaustion.
Have got any extras to see tomorrow now?
Was that
Oh,
I think someone's got a conversation going on in the background. If you can, try to mute yourself if there's others in the room with you. But thank you for joining us. We love having you here. So yeah, the burnout signs are more of those chronic signs where it's really starting to impact performance. And noticing poor performance at work can absolutely be a way that we're recognising burnout. I think we might have had background. Never mind, I'm going to push through. So burnout signs, poor performance is a really good sign that we're starting to feel burned out. Another one is chronically poor immune function. So I'll take you through a case shortly where poor immune function was actually for that person. So let's think about what happens in our brain. So what's actually going on in terms of the brain physiology?
I'd be fabulous. Oh, just have a ball. Oh, I just thought she'd say.
Guys, can I ask you to mute yourselves if there's others in the background? It's a little bit disturbing for people in the room. I think I've asked everyone to mute. There we go. There's a couple of new arrivals. There we go. So brain physiology, what's happening in our brain when we're stressed? So there are three key areas of the brain, or structures in the brain, which govern our response to stress. So what's happening in these areas to create stress in our experience? So firstly, the amygdala. This one is that tiny little sort of almond-shaped structure. It sits sort of behind the eyes, right in the center of the brain, and it detects stress. So it perceives stress. So it detects the feeling of fear, and it's the part of us that prepares the body to start, fighting or fleeing. The hippocampus stores our memory. So short and long-term memory gets stored here. So where we learn. So we also learn, of course, from past experiences. And some of those past experiences might be negative. So this is where trauma can be stored and can influence the way that we think and feel about stress. Like I said, the amygdala detects our feeling of fear. And of course, that perception of fear is just as real in the brain, whether it's real stress or whether it's a perceived stress. And this is where things like watching the news can come into our stress, because our brain detects the fear response, even though what's happening might not be happening to us. So it's still a reaction that the brain is storing. The prefrontal cortex is kind of like, this is like the calming influence. This is the rational thinking. It's the area of the brain that's known as executive function. So it's where we make decisions. It's that sort of thoughtful processing. And it's influenced by the amygdala and the hippocampus. So it kind of becomes a calming influence to reduce the emotional overreactivity, perhaps, and to remind the self that we're safe and we can get through. I'm also going to point out here the hypothalamus and the pituitary, because we'll talk about those next. So that's part of that HPA axis. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary, you can see how close they are. They're really closely connected. And this is where we can communicate the stress response, and that's how it can be so quick, because those structures are very, very close to each other. So the hypothalamus detects the stress response. It's communicated through the other structures of the brain, and it releases its hormone, cortico-releasing hormone. This hormone gets detected by the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland then secretes cortico-releasing hormone to stimulate the adrenals to produce cortisol. So our adrenals then do the work of producing that stress hormone that we hear so much about. So this is the HPA axis. And this sort of refers to the common idea of adrenal fatigue. So adrenal fatigue, yes, our adrenals do get tired with chronic stress and like chronic output requirement for them, but it's not just the adrenals. It's also our hypothalamus and pituitary gland that are part of that process, and that subsequent exhaustion that we can feel because of that overproduction of cortisol or long-term production of that stress hormone cortisol. Okay, so physical effects. Let's talk about what happens in the body. So if you think back to your high school science, you might remember this diagram of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. So the sympathetic nervous system is the part that is responding to cortisol. And if you notice the type of activities, these are all about inhibiting, like I said at the beginning with that mountain lion story, it's all about inhibiting the unnecessary things like stomach activity. We don't need that when we're trying to get away from a lion. It's all about upregulating heartbeat, upregulating our ability to see, so dilating the pupils. So these are stress signs because they're part of our sympathetic nervous system process. The parasympathetic nervous system is the part that we really want to influence and to calm, so that we find the heartbeat slowed down. We get better digestion because our stomach is stimulated. The parasympathetic nerves are all about relaxing. I think of this as rest and digest, and that really does stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system to do its job in calming all of those processes down. And so the chronic stimulation through that HPA axis truly can lead to multisystemic symptoms. And I'm going to take you through some of the common ones that I certainly see in practice. So a really common condition or set of symptoms that I see are thyroid symptoms. So the thyroid is activated by similar pathways as our HPA axis. So if you look at the diagram on the right there, and just a quick check-in, everyone can see, please make a note in the chat for me if you can't see anything or you can't hear me. I know there's been a few people join from the beginning. Great, everyone seems okay. Awesome. So on that right-hand side of the slide there, you can see that the HPA axis is there. So our hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal, and that process we just talked through. And then next to it is the hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid axis. So our thyroid is also governed by hypothalamus and pituitary. And you'll notice here as well that the overproduction of cortisol inhibits the process of active thyroid hormone. So the conversion of T4, which is our inactive hormone, to T3, which is the active thyroid hormone, is changed when we're stressed. And that's important because every cell of the body requires active thyroid hormone to have good function. So some of the symptoms of thyroid disorder can be weight gain, hair fall, depression. So symptoms that we might not necessarily think of in relation to the thyroid, but definitely depression can be a part of that. Dry skin, fatigue, all of these can be a part of that picture. And when we are highly stressed, and particularly long-term, that thyroid pathway is just as impacted as the HPA axis. So immune function, gosh, I see a lot of people who have depleted immunity based on their HPA axis dysregulation. So what happens here is when we have a prolonged exposure to stress, our body starts to produce more pro-inflammatory cytokines. So that cytokine storm that you might be familiar with if you think back to the start of the pandemic, where we started to talk and hear a lot in the news about the cytokine storm and how this upregulated inflammation in the body. This process occurs when we're stressed too. And so that then leads to systemic inflammation and dysregulates our immune system, which can mean that we have autoimmune conditions presenting themselves. Things like allergies can flare up. Eczema can get worse. Long COVID, we treat long COVID by addressing adrenal function as well. It can even lead to susceptibility to food intolerances both through the inflammation that's being produced through the cytokine storm, but also through the relationship with gut health and how the gut can become leaky because of this prolonged stress, because cortisol has an impact in our gut function as well. So one of the ways that I monitor immune function at Remedy is through using our live blood analysis. So this is where we take a finger prick of blood, we look at it under the microscope, and we have a look at both your red blood cell function and your white blood cell function. So this is quite different to having your blood drawn at a pathology centre. We're not looking at the quantity of things necessarily in the blood, but we're looking at the quality of those cells and how they behave. So from an immune perspective, this is really enlightening. It can tell me if you're overproducing certain types of white blood cells, or if you're underproducing, if you don't have enough soldiers to fight your battle. It can also give me a read on whether your immune system is depleted. And I see this quite commonly with chronic stress cases, where the immune system shows signs of depletion, of a long-term immune fatigue. And that's where we can use this tool to find out if that's a part of what's going on for individuals. I really like this tool. It's quick, it's simple, and it really doesn't hurt. The girls that do the tests are very gentle. So let me talk you through a case study with James. So this is a recent case from this year, and I really wanted to add it into this year's presentation because I feel like it really explains how stress impacts our immune system. So James was mid-40s, or is mid-40s. He presented with viral illnesses. He was getting sick all the time, catching everything. Every cold and flu that came through the office he would get. He has young kids at home as well, so he would catch everything from them. He really felt depleted. And of course, being sick time after time is a stress in itself. But being sick all of the time when you're, in that full-time working capacity also means it's hard because you need to have downtime from work when you're unwell. And sometimes people feel that puts them behind the 8 ball. Their inbox doesn't get smaller. They still have a workload when they come back from taking sick leave. So it can be really tough when someone's getting sick, time after time. It also meant that he was, because of this impact on his work ability, he was getting worried about his performance. And he was getting a bit snappy with his family. His sleep was being affected. His digestion was pretty good. He didn't seem to have too many digestive problems, but he did notice that when he was getting run down and tired, he would put less effort into eating well. So he'd eat a bit more of the junk food during the day. So he had a combination of a high pressure role, which he enjoyed, but it also involved shift type roles. So he had a job, or has a job, where he starts very early in the morning, and that sometimes also means that he'll work later in the day, and that's also pushing his hours out and making him a bit more fatigued. Young family, bit of pressure to stay fit, so wants to go to the gym, but not really feeling like he could do it, so feeling a bit under par as such. Unsocial, didn't want to hang out with his mates too much, was drinking a bit more than he would have liked, so alcohol was starting to be a factor as well. And like I said, his sleep wasn't too good. So our goal for James was to get his immune health back on track and also really understand what was going on to lead his immune system to be so weakened. So the testing that I did for James, we did the test I just showed you, so the live blood analysis. And I also did an adrenal output test to examine just how well or poorly his adrenals were functioning. James was also interested in his DNA. So we did some DNA testing, which gave us also a few more interesting highlights on his susceptibilities and nutritional needs for life as well as to cope with stress. So we'll come back to James a little later, and I'll give you a recap on how his treatment has gone. So an area of real interest for me is the microbiome. And some of you might have attended my microbiome seminar earlier in the year, where we talked about the gut-brain axis. So I'm going to bring it in here as well, because it is a really important emerging part of the research around brain health and how we can moderate our stress. So this is a list essentially of the research that's going on, and it continues to go on in probiotics. And you'll notice that the way we're leading with probiotics now. So we've done a lot of research already around probiotics and their benefits in reducing inflammation in the gut and fueling a healthy microbiome, and some of the systemic benefits as well, such as metabolic and weight loss benefits using the right type of probiotics. But more and more, we're seeing the research in this area is actually around mental health. So you can see on that slide that depression, Parkinson's, cognition, stress, autism, mood, ADHD, sleep. These are areas that are being investigated with regard to probiotics, because there is such a strong relationship between our gut health and our brain health. And I see this in patients all the time. When the gut health improves, it reduces stress in the brain. When the inflammation that's being put around the body, when we manage the stress as well as the gut, that inflammation level starts to decline, and their mood improves as well, because the brain can get inflamed. And we know now that inflammation in the brain is more of a driver for mood disorders than actually neurotransmitters being dysregulated. So really important research being done around probiotics. So bear with me if you've heard this story before, but it is one that I think is so interesting and highlights the importance of having a healthy gut to inform a healthy brain and to reduce stress and its impact. So researchers wanted to examine this relationship, and they found mice. So mice are always a good set of candidates because they're quite compliant. And they separated the mice into two groups. And one group of mice, they exposed them to a lot of stress. And I imagine that for mice, that probably means that cats were a part of the stress. They also, from what I understand, exposed them to bright lights and loud noises, lots of stressful things that mice wouldn't like. And the other group were not in a stressful situation, but what they did do to that group is they stripped their gut of all good bacteria. So they essentially gave them a combination of antibiotics to strip their microbiome. And then they implanted, using a fecal microbiome transplant, they implanted the microbes from the anxious mice into the completely calm, no reason to be anxious group of mice. And what they saw was the mood changed in the second group. So they started to display signs of not wanting to be with their colleagues, so their mouse friends. So they were becoming unsocial. They wanted to sleep more. They exhibited signs of anxiety and depression. They were also very reactive to even slight noise changes or temperature changes. They would just become a very, very reactive group. So this is a clear indication in mice, admittedly, not in humans, but we do tend to see that mice inform future studies and allow us to discover more. But it at least describes to us that this process isn't just about the communication between the brain and the gut. It's very much about the communication from the gut to the brain. So having a healthy digestion, having a healthy, robust microbiome is just as important for mental health as it is for digestive function. I'm attending the International Microbiome Symposium next week, and always love hearing the new research. So I'll hopefully have some new updates for you next time, because all of that research, like I said, is very much in the mental health space. So understanding your personal biology, I've mentioned a couple of these tests already. So the sort of things that we might do to understand what's going on for you. I'll show you just in a moment what a cortisol and melatonin test can look like. We can also look at your reproductive hormones. Sometimes that's thrown out of whack because your reproductive hormones are also impacted by that pituitary hypothalamus balance. Thyroid testing, so definitely this is usually done through blood. The complete microbiome mapping or other types of microbiome testing might be useful. Your practitioner might also look at nutritional profiling and hair testing if we think that there are mineral deficiencies or heavy metals and toxins that could be impacting the brain health. That's also a really good way to understand what's going on for you. And smart DNA can be useful as well. So one of the core ones that I always do where someone is presenting with stress is the adrenal cortex stress profile. And this essentially measures the amount of cortisol that's in your system throughout the day. So cortisol should follow a pattern. We should start with the highest of our cortisol ought to be in the morning when we wake up. Because cortisol, as well as being a stress hormone, it's what keeps us alert. It wakes us up, it keeps us focused. So it's highest in the morning. It then declines naturally throughout the day, and ideally it should be at a nice low level in the evening, and then our melatonin naturally takes over. As the sun comes down and we prepare to go to bed, we should start to reach that natural melatonin cycle, but only if our cortisol drops enough. And sometimes we see that the cortisol is starting to peak. So we can see that for this person, and this was James. So James had very high levels of cortisol first thing in the morning. In fact, it was so high, it tipped the chart. So they stop checking the level. So the maximum level is 100 and his came in at 100. So very, very high cortisol first thing in the morning. So the feelings of this would be a feeling of panic, a feeling of apprehension of, oh my God, I've got to face another day, that sort of sensation in the body and mind. It then does decline. You can see that that line does decline, but it still doesn't come into the normal levels that we would like to see. And then throughout the day, instead of declining steadily, it steadily increased. As you can see here in the evening, his cortisol output is probably about double what it should be for that evening time, which makes it really hard to unwind. It makes it really hard for him to get into that natural sleep state and go off and have a good deep sleep to replenish from the day. So this is what we look at as burnout. This is where the adrenals are overstimulated and that HPA axis is just driving constantly. So a measure of this, a way that we can test for ourselves, and I test this every day, so I wear something called an Oura ring. If you want to find out more about that, I'm very happy to talk about how I use it. But the Oura ring is one way to measure your heart rate variability. There are others. There are smart devices that people wear on their on the wrists, and other types of monitors as well. So this isn't heart rate, it's different. It's the heart rate variability, which is the variability, it's the determined level between the heartbeats. So we should have adaptability. There should be some variety in the distance between those heartbeats. And how that flexes, how adaptable that is under stress is a measure of our adaptability to stress, our way of handling stress. And I really like this as a measure. It's something that people can do for themselves and sort of feel that they can understand what's happening in their body. And you can see that for this particular person, using sleep sounds, yoga, walking and meditation certainly improved their heart rate variability. So a higher heart rate variability is what we're looking for. And that indicates vagal tone or good vagal nerve processing. So we're at the halfway point. I've covered the biology, the things that happen when we're under stress. The next half is going to be about the solutions and what we can do, both for ourselves and through naturopathic medicine. But I wanted to pause for a moment to see if there's any questions so far that you might want to share. Does anyone have any questions that they want to bring up at this stage? Is everyone just enjoying their dinner? Great. Look, if you do have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I obviously won't get to them straight away, but we'll get to them at the end if you think of anything. You can send those messages to me in the chat privately if you wish to. And of course, there'll be various ways that you can connect with me personally after the session. Okay, so moving on. What are the steps to reverse burnout? So this is the what to do. How can we improve our response to stress? And some of this is through the medical herbalism and nutrition. So the things that we can do for ourselves, which I love. So the nutrients that we might use would be magnesium, B vitamins, GABA, L-carnitine is great for mental focus. So if stress and burnout is leaving us to feel foggy in the brain, then L-carnitine can be a nutrient that's useful. Glutamine is great. So glutamine has a few different uses. So it's an amino acid. It helps with gut healing. So it helps with that leaky gut presentation. But it also has an impact on mental focus. Just a warning with glutamine, though, if you're going to look to use these, do talk to your practitioner about the ideal dose for you, because it is the precursor to glutamate, which is one of our stimulating neurotransmitters. And too much glutamate can lead us to anxiety and actually worsen that HPA axis. So just a warning to not self-medicate with that, and to talk to your practitioner about the dose that's best for you. L-theanine, I'm seeing so much emerging research on this amino acid nutrient. It's really great for supporting mental focus with calm. So it's a very calming nutrient. It's even been used in ADHD alongside medication to improve mental focus and to calm the behaviours in children. Unfortunately, those studies at this stage have only been done in boys, but I'm hoping that they do cross over to females as well. Of course, I've mentioned probiotics. I would be able to practice without good understanding of probiotics, and there are certainly some really good strains that help with mental focus and managing stress. They mostly fall in the lactobacillus species. So those would be the ones that are best for managing stress and anxiety. So when you look at strain-specific formulas for stress and burnout, they would usually have those types in them. And of course, we can have good probiotics from our food as well. So, you know, things like kimchi, kefir, sauerkraut, those can all be beneficial for keeping our gut healthy and having that positive knock-on effect. So many of the nutrients that I've mentioned here, and herbs, in fact, help to blunt the cortisol response, modulate the neurotransmission. So notice I say modulate, not upregulate. So modulating means that it's creating a balance in the neurotransmitters. We're not trying to force something to do too much or blunt its production. We're trying to modulate so we get a good balance in the brain. We can reduce inflammation using herbs and nutrients, and natural medicines have a great benefit on that. Exercise is also very good for reducing inflammation. And repairing damage. So sometimes the brain gets damaged, whether that's through heavy metals, in cases of Alzheimer's, the laying down of plaques in the brain. There's a natural substance called brain-derived neurotropic factor, and BDNF is improved using certain herbs. There's a lot of research to show that herbs like bacopa and lion's mane can actually enhance the production of BDNF and therefore heal the brain in many ways. And also BDNF is improved with exercise. Just a short amount of moderate exercise. It doesn't have to be an hour and a half in the gym. It can just be a nice walk in nature. Helps to improve your own natural production of this healing substance in the brain. And supporting mitochondria. So supporting mitochondria is important with our nutrition because our brain is massively full of mitochondria. Mitochondria are those powerhouses that create the molecules of energy throughout the whole body, but the brain is really rich in mitochondria and really needs that, sometimes needs that extra support, particularly where depression and burnout are concerned. So some of the herbs, I've just mentioned a couple of them there, things like Romania. Your practitioner will choose the right ones for you. I love bacopa. Bacopa is a great herb for mental focus. I use it in dementia and Alzheimer's patients, anywhere where there's foggy brain. It's also very beneficial in the brain fog that comes with long COVID. And medicinal mushrooms. So here I'm thinking things like turkey tail, reishi, and lion's mane, so really useful herbs for stress. There's lots of them. We refer to most of the herbs for stress as being adaptogens because their purpose is to help your body to adapt to stress. And one of my favorite adaptogens is withania, also known as ashwagandha. It's very popular these days. You can buy it in teas, you can inhale it probably, I don't know, but it's out there definitely. Ashwagandha is wonderful for many things. It's a modulating adaptogen, so it doesn't enhance the adrenal output, it modulates the adrenal output. So if someone is adrenally fatigued and they're not producing any cortisol or very little, it can support the adrenals in doing their job. Likewise, if there's a case where there's too much adrenal output, then it can modulate it down. So it really helps to find some balance where stress is concerned. I love this in helping my male clients in particular, in male and female clients definitely, but male clients respond really well to this. It does help to increase testosterone levels very gently, and is supportive of the precursor to testosterone, DHEAS. So DHEAS is a backbone hormone that we use to produce both our stress hormones and our sex hormones. And women in menopause also respond really well to this. So it's a really nice herb for that reason. Right. Lion's mane, like I mentioned, lots of great impacts of lion's mane, particularly the anti-fatigue effects where we're talking about burnout. That can be really helpful, and it does help with that mental acuity. I like that lion's mane also has a positive effect on the liver and the gut because there's always improvements we can make to most people's detoxification channels. Okay, this is a list that I found on B vitamins. So people sometimes come to me saying, oh, I thought I might start taking some vitamin B6 because I heard it's really good for when I'm feeling tired, or I've been feeling a bit flat, usually before my period maybe, and so I've started taking B6. That's great. B6, you know, the research on these things can sometimes be seen independently, but I really like people to have the whole spectrum of B vitamins. So all the way from B1 to B12, and I'll often prescribe a complex of B vitamins. They all have sort of sister relationships. So I think it is good to make sure we're using a complex or a formula that has a few of these along with some other nutrients to act as cofactors. And that's another thing with B vitamins. They often act as cofactors for some of our hormones and stress hormones, but they're definitely vital for a healthy stress adaptation. And don't forget, we can get them from food, not just from supplements. Our food contains B vitamins. Look for whole grains. Look for dark leafy green vegetables. They're really good sources of B vitamins. And it wouldn't be a talk on stress if I didn't bring in magnesium. So magnesium's relationship with stress. When we are low in magnesium, it is a stress on our body. We need stress. We all have stress. We need magnesium to stimulate our central nervous system, but also to relax. It helps with the release of neurotransmitters, but it also relaxes when we've got too many of them. It really is an important part of our central nervous system function and reducing stress. For anyone who's ever had tension in their shoulders, tension headaches, magnesium is really important. If you ever had that little twitching in the side of your eye, a good sign of magnesium depletion, or cramps, restless legs, leg cramps, these are all signs of magnesium depletion. And we know that magnesium can moderate stress by regulating some of the neurotransmitters as well. So I think that's really important. So it does regulate GABA, and it can modulate the NMDA receptor, which is the excitatory receptor in the brain. So really helpful for anxiety, stress, and to modulate those things. So like I said, it's not all about supplements. You know, think about our diet. So this was research called the SMILES trial. look it up. You'll find it if you just look for Professor Felice Jacker was the head of this research study. The SMILES trial was done on a diet of whole food, a Mediterranean style diet, making sure that people had adequate protein and healthy fats. So what they did here was a 12-week study, and they took people who had signs of, or were, sorry, clinically depressed. So most of those people were on medication, and they stayed on their medication. They made no change to that. They didn't change their exercise. All they changed was their eating pattern. And it wasn't too complicated. So, you know, if someone was typically having, let's say, pizza and ice cream, they just encouraged them to have a stir fry and maybe yogurt and berries. So just switching to healthier options along the 12 weeks. And what they found was that people had really good outcomes. So over 70% of the treatment group had reduced depression signs. Many of them actually were able to cease their medication. And they also found that the greater the degree of dietary change, so the more people were switching to healthier options, the better their improvement in symptoms. So having more omega-3s in their diet, having that adequate protein, it's so important. So many of the foods that we eat, particularly processed foods, they're very high carbohydrate and very low nutrition. So just making some simple switches can really help to improve nutritional quality, but really improve the outcomes in terms of mental health and how we are adapting to stress. So if anyone's interested in just doing a simple change like this to their diet, I'd be very happy to share with you a Mediterranean lifestyle sheet and also some recipes. So I've got a 7-day recipe plan that you can follow that's really not complicated, that will be Mediterranean style if you'd like to give that a try. So food, nutrition, herbs, we've talked about a few things already, but what can we do in our environment? What's happening around us that we can impact to reduce our stress? So the 4-day work week, this will be an interesting one to go into work and talk to your boss about. I hope there'll be some employers that will be interested in this. So the 4-day work week, the concept here is that employees, instead of working a typically 40-hour week, would work a 32-hour week, but still get paid for the same hours. And it sounds quite radical, but this has been done all over the world. So studies have been done in the UK, in Japan, in Spain, and it's even been brought in Australia, believe it or not. So the companies where they do bring this in have seen increased employee well-being, a really positive impact on the bottom line. So these businesses actually make more money. They reduce some of their costs. So it does improve the business outcomes as well as the employee outcomes. They save money on the way that they hire and retain talent. So keeping people in the business. So if someone feels less stressed, if they feel that they're performing better at work, then they're going to stay for longer. And it also is quite appealing sometimes for people knowing that a business is operating with a 4-day work week. So retaining and hiring good people into their business, which is an improvement to companies' bottom line as well. So benefits for companies and individuals. It sounds radical, but it's really worth looking into. If you're a business owner, give this some thought and have a look at the research, because it really is beneficial as an employer and as an employee. Employees are less stressed by 70%. Gosh, isn't that a great thing to be able to report? And 78% happier. So this was a study from Henley Business School a few years ago. So even notice that was even pre-COVID. So this wasn't just something that happened as a result of COVID, but something that we all probably experienced during the pandemic. Oops, I've gone backwards. Let me see if I can change that. There we go. Was working from home. Working from home certainly was already happening, but became a lot more popular and commonplace during the pandemic and since, in fact. So the benefits here, if your boss isn't happy with the idea of a 4-day work week, at least having some working from home capacity can really help to provide people with more family time, better productivity. So people do feel like they're better at their jobs when they can do a little bit of it at home. They're less distracted, but they also gain back a little bit of that commute time. So they feel like they've got more control over their time and more ownership. It does show that it leads to employee satisfaction and retains staff again. So business benefits as well. Definitely something worth thinking about is how can, if you find that the workplace for you or occupational stress is the part of your stress that's the strongest, then looking at how you can change your relationship with your work is so important, because we all need our work. It means if we take away our work, then financial stress might take over. So how can you make it work for you is a really good thing to think about. So sleep we definitely need. If we're not sleeping well, it is a stress on our body. Sleep isn't just a passive experience, it's a very active experience. During sleep, the cells of our body are regenerating and detoxifying, but most importantly for me, our brain is detoxifying. So the cerebral spinal fluid literally washes through the brain, cleans it out. It helps the brain to recover and replenish for the next day. So I think if you're not sleeping well, this has to be the first thing that you do to help to manage your stress better. That might mean if you've got sleep bandits in the house, if you've got kids, cats, dogs that disturb you at night, it might be worth thinking about how you can change your sleeping arrangements to avoid those sleep bandits. Another sleep bandit can be noise and light. So look out for those. You need a dark room, and you do need quiet. And if you can't achieve that through, structurally changing your room, then, use appliances that help with that. Use, eye masks or earplugs just to reduce the amount of noise. Most importantly, sleep. A good night's sleep starts the morning before. So think about this in terms of your caffeine and your stimulant intake. If you're having coffee at midday, you're likely to still be affected by that caffeine at bedtime. So I've got nothing against a little bit of caffeine in our world. If we tolerate it, okay, it's fine, but have it earlier in the day. So the caffeine has a half-life of between 7 and 9 hours, depending on your genetics. And so that means that if you're having it, like I said, at midday, you've potentially still got half of the caffeine in your system at bedtime. So try to make it mid-morning that you have your caffeine. I also like my patients to not have coffee first thing in the morning. Have a glass of water. I'm just about to have a sip now because I'm getting a little dry. Start your day with a glass of water. Have your coffee a little bit later. Herbal tea is fine. Even green tea, it has a tiny amount of caffeine, but it's much more gentle on the system because of some of the other alkaloids in there than just straight caffeine. So try to keep your caffeine for about that mid-morning time. A warm shower before bed. This can be a really nice way to improve your sleep. A warm shower before bed draws the blood flow to the periphery, meaning that we chill the core by about 1 degree. And actually reducing your core temperature by 1 degree can induce sleep and aid a deeper sleep. And that's also a reason why glycine is important or helpful. So glycine is an amino acid. I like to combine my magnesium. When I dose magnesium for people, I make sure they're using a glycine or bisglycinate formula of magnesium, so they get the benefits of the glycine as well. And glycine has been shown to improve sleep quality and sleep time because it has that ability to drop the core temperature as well, which is fascinating, isn't it? And that's the study on the right side of that page. Having small amount of glycine in the evening can really help to improve sleep quality. And that can be tracked using some of your sleep tracking devices as well. So you can see the impact of these things. Movement. So, having good movement in your world is a really nice way to make sure that you're encouraging vagal tone. It improves the release of endorphins. Of course, make the movement that you choose enjoyable. I don't think we all have to be gym junkies. If you love the gym, that's great. But if the idea of the gym just horrifies you, not for you. Choose a different way of doing it. Go swimming, go cycling, take up dancing, whatever is enjoyable for you, then involve some movement in your day. And like I said, movement improves that BDNF production, so you get a better mental focus as well. And, you're likely to have good health in your brain long term. Exercise helps to build resilience, not just physical, but stress resilience as well. And I really like this last point here. It can reverse the maladaptive neuroplasticity. So that maladaptive neuroplasticity, what happens when the neurons in the brain are overfiring, particularly in that prefrontal cortex, is the overfiring with neurotransmitters, that kind of excitatory on, keep push, that sort of process reduces the other neurons. So neurons actually retract away from that excitatory neuron, and that changes the shape and the activity of your brain structures, and particularly the prefrontal cortex, which is that, remember how I said at the beginning, the prefrontal cortex is kind of the calming, the rational part of the brain. So we really need that rational part of the brain when we're in chronic stress to help us to calm and to make good decisions. Cold exposure. So I've recently, been looking more into cold exposure, particularly for people who are on multiple medications when they're very stressed and stress has been affecting their brain for a long time. This can be quite beneficial. What I will say is there's definitely an application in chronic depression. In anxiety, it's not always the right thing. So try it. If it's not for you, don't feel bad about that. And also that, using cold exposure is not a new concept. This research was from 1974, where they were looking at adrenal function in response to cold stress. They actually did more moderate temperatures. So we seem to see people doing ice baths more frequently now. They looked at temperatures a little bit higher. So they were looking at tepid water, warm water, and cooler water, and they stayed in the water for longer as well. So if you don't feel like ice baths are quite for you, even just reducing the temperature of your shower a little bit at the end might be enough to just improve your adrenal function and reduce the effects of stress. It certainly is shown, so cold exposure, ice baths, if you love them, is shown to reduce inflammation. You absolutely know that that's the case. So that's probably where that application in chronic depression comes from, because we know that that inflammation is in the brain as well as in the body. So cold exposure has been shown to improve sleep in some people, but I do say that if it's anxiety you're suffering more with, maybe don't force yourself into cold therapy if you don't feel like it's the right thing for you. I like to think about our mindset for stress, because cortisol isn't always bad, and stress isn't always bad. Stress can make us perform better. It can make us more focused. So it's how we think about stress that really has the results. And the reason I put this in here is to invite you all to make a note. And if you do want these notes, if you haven't already downloaded the slides from the chat, let me know. I do have a whole resources list for you. But Kelly McGonigal did a brilliant TED talk. It's a few years old now, but it's still worth watching. So Kelly is a health psychologist, and she reports on a study of 30,000 people across the world, and they looked at their stress levels. They asked them, first of all, how their stress was in the previous 12 months. Were they under mild amounts of stress? Did they feel they had moderate amounts of stress? Or did they have a lot of stress in their life? And they then asked them what their beliefs about stress were. Did they believe that stress was a negative thing? Did they believe that stress was harmful to their health? Could it lead them to have heart attacks? Or did they believe that stress was simply something that came and went? And it really seemed that the outcomes were that people who were highly stressed. So if you were putting your hand up mentally in your mind there to say, yes, that's me. In the last 12 months, I've been extremely stressed. Then the chances of their health being impacted was 43% higher than those that were not stressed at all. So stress did impact their health. But that only happened for those who believed that stress was a problem. For those that didn't perceive stress as being a problem, it simply didn't have the same effect. And I believe that that's because of that prefrontal cortex, that ability for the prefrontal cortex to rationalize and let us know that this too will pass, that it might not be as bad as you think, maybe you're worrying about nothing, that in the past when we've had stressful situations, we've dealt with it, we've been okay. It's that rational brain that allows us to chill, calm down, and perceive stress as not being the ogre that it might be. And I just think that's interesting. So I would encourage you to watch the TED Talk and just see how you feel about your mindset for stress. So on mindset, on mindfulness, there are lots of mindfulness techniques that you can use. I'm sure some of you have. Just realised we're coming to the end of the 60 minutes, but we'll still keep going. And if you're happy to still join me, please do. I don't have too many more slides left to go. But mindfulness techniques can be a really wonderful way to adapt to stress. And research shows that all of these different techniques have benefits for adaptation to stress. Nature bathing is wonderful. In Canada, they did research on, they gave GPs free passes for their patients to go and explore in the national parks there, because they charge an entry fee, much as they do to some of the parks here, but they gave them free to patients who had anxiety and depression related to stress. And found that many of those patients could come away from their medication, that things improved purely by doing half an hour walk in nature 2 or 3 times a week. So not everything has to cost a lot of money. Yes, we can do expensive therapies. I'm going to talk you through a few therapies that I refer for, and those therapists are excellent, but it can be done through journaling. It can be done through meditation. If you're not keen on meditation, or it's something you'd like to explore but you're not too sure, I really recommend this book by Shannon Harvey, My Year of Living Mindfully. She was diagnosed with a severe autoimmune condition. There was no treatment really offered to her, and she essentially reversed her condition using meditative practices. She used, I think she used the Calm app, or one of the app-based programs, but meditation can absolutely make a big difference. And I'm just going to bring you back to this heart rate variability slide again, because notice that all of those activities are things that are free, that were easy to do at home. And I'm happy to share with you that this was my results a couple of years ago. And it was a time where I'd been under extreme amounts of stress. And that month, I did feel an awful lot better, even though my heart rate variability was still only 29, but it was coming off a quite low benchmark. So it was definitely an improvement. Okay, so some of the practices that I like to do and like to recommend. So one of them is acupuncture. So this is an introduction to Dr. Adam Fedorov. He's one of our colleagues at Remedy, a great acupuncturist, and he shared with me some notes here on acupuncture. I personally understand that acupuncture really works well for me. I always feel better after I've had my acupuncture. It does help me to feel less stressed about life. But clinically, what's happening when we have acupuncture is we're producing more endorphins. So those beta endorphins really inhibit the HPA response that we've just gone through. We see greater amounts of serotonin produced. So we know how serotonin makes us feel happier. So lack of serotonin can lead us to feeling flat and depressed. So acupuncture is a really nice way to enhance that. Inflammation, acupuncture reduces inflammation, absolutely, both for physical stress and for mental, emotional stress. And it's the balancing of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves that acupuncture has a lot of research in. So really nice to try. And another thing as well, where I have patients who maybe are on medications that it's just sometimes a bit complicated to prescribe herbs with, I'll always recommend that they try acupuncture because it's very safe, and the needles are only very tiny, so they don't hurt, I promise. So coming back to James. So you might remember that James was working hard. He's in his mid-40s, so he's in that phase of life where he's pushing. He's got a young family he's providing for. One of his goals was to stop getting those colds and flu so much and actually feel well enough to take his family overseas. He wanted to take them to Europe and explore and have a really nice time while the kids are young. And he felt that he couldn't do that when we first met because he would get sick and it would ruin the holiday, and he'd come back sick and then he'd end up taking more time off work. So I'm really happy to say that when I recently met with James, he had that holiday and he didn't get sick while he was there. In fact, he hasn't been unwell. He hasn't had any viral illnesses, touch wood, or colds, flus. None of those things have attacked him since we started working together. And he had that nice holiday and felt really recovered and refreshed from it as well. So he's doing a lot better. His sleep is better. He's made a few adjustments to the sleeping arrangements as well, which is good. And he's back to doing some exercise, which he feels is empowering. And he described the way he feels now as that he feels like he has faith in his body again, where when we first met, he just felt that his immune system was so dysregulated that he couldn't really control what was going on in his body anymore. So it's only taken a few months. We've been working together for, I think, 3 months, and he's already in a really good immune situation. The things that I used for him to improve things were some herbs for immune function and adrenal support. We used magnesium and we used a complex of B vitamins as well. I used activated Bs for James because we did find out through that DNA testing that he had certain genetics that required activated versions of the B vitamins. So getting them through diet alone just was never really going to cut it for him, particularly during times of stress. When he's out of this stressful stage of life, things might be different, and he might be able to provide enough of those Bs through diet alone. Okay. So coming back to this diagram, I'm just reminded that, the decision really there for James was, well, I enjoy my work. I'm the breadwinner. I like what I do. I'm good at it. I don't want to stop doing it. So the occupational stress was absolutely the area that was of the greatest factor for him. But weighing it up between, not working would mean financial stress. But what we've been able to do is to give him better stress resilience. So he's now able to do the recreational things he wants to. He's able to get to the gym. He's not as snappy with his family. He's got way more patience with the kids, and his wife, which is great. Okay, so it comes to a question of, I think, what do you want to do next for your stress resilience and to improve the balance in your mind and body? So the first thing is to assess the origin of your stress. And I would go back to that slide we just looked at. What are the areas, and it may be multiple areas, where is stress located in your life? And think about what you might be able to do about that. Are there some conversations you need to have? Are there ways that you can pull back from some of those stressful situations a little bit so that you can get better balance for life and work? I'm also going to mention here using your annual leave. So if you're someone who keeps your annual leave squirreled away for a rainy day, try not to do it too much. There are, I forget the statistics, but last year there was something like 4.6 billion days of annual leave banked in Australia, and we don't need to do that. Use your annual leave. The purpose of annual leave is for you to rest, replenish, connect with your family, feel good, recover, so that you come back to work feeling more balanced. and you'll perform better by doing that and having a little break. Even if it's just taking an annual leave day here and there, just to have that shorter week and a bit more balance, I would encourage you to use your annual leave. Simple things that you can do for yourself. Get good nutrition. Talk to me or email me if you want some support with the Mediterranean diet. It's a very good place to start. I've also got some good ideas up my sleeve for ways to do healthy eating, even if you're not a good cook and don't want to cook for yourself. There are lots of ways that you can do healthy eating these days, and I can support you with that. Make sure you're resting well, get good sleep. And if you're not doing that already, please do reach out, talk to your practitioner about that. Get moving. It doesn't have to be a gym workout, but get moving. Think about your mindset around stress, and make some meaningful connections. There is nothing better than having a good conversation with someone that really gets you, and that in itself can reduce your cortisol levels. There's nothing better than having a cup of tea and a good old chat to drop your cortisol, to drop those stress levels down. If you need it, please do reach out for naturopathic support. Some of the holistic treatments such as acupuncture, massage, those things can be really beneficial as well. And of course, counselling. And this is another introduction I'd like to make to Alex. Alex Field is a registered psychotherapist at Remedy. She's wonderful. If you haven't come across EMDR, EMDR is a process of eye movement, which can be used in trauma. So Alex is a trauma-informed counsellor. She is wonderful. If you look her up, Google her, she has an online program called the HEAL Method, which is wonderful and a really good place to start before you go into one-on-one counselling with her. So we've come to the end. I'm so sorry for going over, but I hope the extra 10 minutes was valuable to you. Do feel free to unmute yourselves. I will stop the recording now because I realise that these questions may not be relevant to the recording as well. Recording folk, thank you for joining me and thank you for sticking around for the extra 10 minutes as well. I will stop the recording just now.